There's a lot to do for a cox in this event. There's a lot of steering. Like I say, you have to cross the actual center stream twice in order to take the fastest line. And then, there comes to, then there's some sort of tactical situations where, like you said, a lot of crews, if you're coming up behind a crew quite fast and they have to take a corner, you can not take the corner in order sort of to come up and hit the back of them. But then, like you said, if you miss, you can kind of miss and go past each other. And then maybe you get this kind of, and then quite often that last stretch past Boathouse Island, if it's getting really close, you'll then get one crew's kind of trying
to create as much distance as possible.
You get in order to get the bump, what happens is the closer you get to the boat in front of you, the more difficult it becomes to row because you're rowing in more wash. So it's this thing where it can sometimes look like you're so close for so long. You think, why don't they just do it? But as the closer you get, the more difficult it becomes. Yeah. Plus, obviously, the crew is then trying to react, and they'll be putting in, because it's like that all or nothing. Once you get bumped, it's over anyway. So you may as well just throw everything at it. So you just get this little, like, all the way down. It can be quite fun.
And the nature of the racing, obviously, if you're doing side-by-side stuff, then although we tell the athletes not to, you still look out the corner of your eye as to what's going on around you, and that's an external motivation for you as a rower. But in bumps racing, all you can see is the crew that's chasing you.
Yeah.
And you, apart from what the cox is telling you, you have absolutely no frame of reference to what's going on behind you. And so as soon as you start feeling it a little bit bumpy, you're like, oh, we're getting close to the crew in front. And you've got not just the wash from the boat, but the turbulence from the puddles, and it just gets exponentially harder every foot you get closer to their stern. So there's no point, just because the crews are started a length and a half apart, there's no point just being a length and a half quicker than the people you need to chase. You need to be 2 to 2.5 lengths quicker to overcome that extra closing, confirming the bump move through all of the rough water.
I also found that it's an incredibly difficult thing to practice. Even a couple of times in practice, in the run-up to Summer 8s, we tried to get an 8 at full speed, chasing another 8 very close, so that the 8 behind could feel what it was like. But then we sort of realised that actually quite dangerous in a way that even just in training with 2H, should someone catch a crab or mess up, then all of a sudden we're gonna ram into our own 8. So it was. It's not necessarily something you can practice, and I think that's something, again, maybe like another sort of draw to it, is that you kind of find yourself in this place that you've not been before, and it's all kind of quite exciting and new and different.
And also, even if you're slightly faster than the crew you're chasing, unless you're 2.5 lengths faster, well, you're just going to be unsuccessful because of just the nature of like how the race goes. So like, would you say that sometimes you can not necessarily have those 2.5 lengths, but then still catch the crew in front of you? Are there like certain tactics and tips and tricks?
That's why the start is very important, because if you don't get that right, suddenly the crew behind you closes down the gap on you very, very quickly. And my dad tells a story of, I think this was 78 at Torpids. Or was it 8s? No, it was 8s, because it was Oriel chasing them. And they, once again, had a very good 8. They had a lot of pedigree in the boat, number of boat race oarsmen, a lot of sports blues. And the Oriel crew behind them had an absolute blinder of a start sequence and jumped them to within half a length within the first 20 strokes, 20, 30, 20, 25 strokes. And you've got boat race oarsmen suddenly put on the back foot and fumbling around and not executing and got caught. And then crews swap around for the next day's racing. Oriel starts at the head, Keeble a second. Keeble gains to about half a length each day, doesn't quite have enough to close on him, and Oriel goes for the headship, because you were able to put a crew under pressure, even a crew of experienced people, to the point where they make the mistakes. And you could actually, ultimately, what the next 3 days of that race, that regatta showed, was that Oriel weren't the quicker crew, but they played the tactics correctly for that day in that race, and turned over a crew that would normally be quicker.
Yeah, but sometimes it's a case of maybe if you can do that, wait until the last day. Because like I said, in that case, Oriel's taken the lead, but then Keeble have got 3 days to kind of come back at them. So there's all sorts of different games going on.
Yeah, and even if you are the faster crew, like you said, if you can be put under pressure, because of the nature of like how nuanced steering is and the tactics, how much like thinking there is involved for the cocks. Even we saw a crew last year who would have potentially gone for the headship, Christchurch.
Yeah.
They ended up in a tree, and that was in Division 1, and they had to just, that day they just weren't going to do it. They had to come back at it again, and because obviously with Summer 8s or with just Copus as well, you can only move up 4 positions in the league. If you lose a day, that can be pretty nasty to like your end result.
Yeah.
So how would you avoid being bumped if you know you're the slower crew?
Well, so this is one of the things that the organising committee, OURCs, are trying to work on, which is, so a concession is when you raise your hand and say, yep, fair enough, you got us. And that's the Cox that does that. But making sure that you do that in good time. And because the last thing you want is to be tangled with another crew when you're still meant to be racing. Because either there are crews coming up behind you that might cause a collision. You've got to, whether you've been bumped or the bumper, you've got to clear the racing line to make sure that it's clear for the crews coming through. So you don't want to cause a tangle. You don't want to get stuck in the bank or in a bush or whatever. You kind of just want it to be as clean and as concise as possible, so that either you can get on with your race, what's left of it at Torpids, or you're just not going to be piled into at 8s, and you can just make that happen quickly. That's what I always tell the cops is, if you know you're going to get caught, don't think that you're going to suddenly outrun somebody. Just make it happen quickly, and that allows us to set ourselves up for a smoother, better day the day after.
And avoid the klaxon.
Yeah, and you don't want to damage, if you damage your boat, if you pull the bow off your boat, then your boatman's got 24 hours to put it back together again.
I mean, they have pulled off some miracles of boatmanship. There was a incident quite a few years ago, which sort of got cult rowing fame. Peters know that video, where St. Peters, it was like, I think it was St. Anne's was stuck in the bank in the gut, and St. Peters just rammed into them, even though the crew was out of action. And St. Anne's were rowing an old style Stamfleet Away, which is basically just 2 pieces of aluminium welded together at a 90-degree angle instead of the traditional 3-stay or 5-stay.
Yeah.
And that thing hit right in the middle of the bows of the Peters boat. So, you've got the top of the canvas there, you've got the bottom of the hull there, and it just entered halfway up and opened this bow like a can opener. And it almost went up to the bulkhead. And so you've basically got this slice through the Hudson bow section. So the bow section is just written off. But the boatman rebuilt it overnight, and while it didn't have, glossy white paint on it, and you could see where the repair was, it was watertight, it had the original shape, and it was good to go again.
It was functional, yeah.
If it was the same one, but I know the boatman Woody, all the boatmen down there do a number of colleges. But he told me a time, same thing. I think when the bow of this boat had got absolutely mashed. They had no idea what they were going to do. They didn't have a spare boat, but they had an old boat out the back that no one had used. And he sort of looked at the bow section. He was like, that looks like slightly bigger than the bow section of the boat. So they just cut it. Like literally just manhandle this bow section into a rough shape and then just slipped over a new bow section of this boat, just like glued it back on and got the boat racing the next day, just by sort of like a cast almost, just slipped on over the front of it. It was quite funny. If there was a lot more money in it, you could have like a removable bow section.
Oh yeah, you buy special 8s. I mean, Empacher and I think Hudson as well, they make 1-piece 8s.
Yeah.
And obviously Oxford Brookes, Cambridge, Shrewsbury School have a few.
Have you seen one on the trailer?
Yeah, it's just massive. Like you can get those sort of things that are custom, so that you don't have to completely split it every single time you transport it. I mean, I think Impact could start investing in detachable bulkhead bows. So it's just like much the same that you carry a spare seat, a spare foot stretcher, a pin, nuts. there's a spare bow section just hanging up in the back of your boathouse. God forbid we need to use it.
I think that's
and then you just wing nut it on.
and that's the opposite of what OURCs are going for. Like, okay, now people know that they can smash their bow up and they can get fixed. They'll be like, no, this is not what we want.
I just think that would be very funny though. But also, just back to an earlier point of bumping and clear concessions and so on. For those who don't know, there are many ways to do it. So obviously there is the actual contact of boat on boat. Mm-hmm. There is blade on boat, boat on blade, which way round that is from each of the crews. Blade on blade, so you could skim blades and that counts as a bump. But my favourite one, and I've only seen it done once, and there is a video on YouTube. It was by Magdalen College back in 2017, I think. Just coming into the gut, as your crew gets close enough and the cox has perfectly positioned the bow to slide up alongside the stern of the crew they're chasing. The bowman's rowing along. He looks down, sees the bow and slaps it. Yeah. And that counts as a bump too.
Yeah.
But he did it in such a good way because he did it right on the finish. So he finished the stroke, bang, and slapped it. And it made such a great noise. And it was, right. And it very rarely happens because a lot of things have got to align for you to be able to do that.
Do you think they practice for that?
I have no idea, but I knew it was part of the rule book and that was a legitimate and valid way to get a bump. Never seen it done.
I hear a lot of people talk about it now, like, and by the way, if you can reach out and grab it.
Really?
Yeah, I've told every single one of my bowmen to do it if they're able to.
Yeah.
But
and then rowing completely past as well.
So if a crew is stuck in the bank, or someone's crabbed and the boat stopped, what all the coxes are told to do, and some still choose not to, but if you see a crew stuck in a bank and they're not bumped out, so they're still a racing crew, just row straight past them and that counts as a bump.
Yeah, you don't have to fly into them.
Yes, you don't have to keep going. So, that's the safer way to do it. Be like, right, we got him, grand, and then hopefully that crew can restart and get going.